the Chase Thomas Podcast, for people who have nothing but time to kill.
All right, we're back here on the Chase Thomas Podcast, where I'm still the aforementioned Chase Thomas, coming to you live from Knoxville, Tennessee, Everything School HQ. Joining me, friend of the program. I did a panel with him, which feels like forever ago now, when Tennessee was in Athens for a big top 10 showdown against the Dogs with TPL. It's SEC Unfiltered's own Chris Phillips. Chris, good evening, sir. How are you?
Chase, I'm doing well, and I appreciate you having me on. And yeah, it was it feels like forever ago, but also yesterday. Obviously, that matchup in Athens, we watched the Vols and Dogs do battle, and that panel was a lot of fun. And you mentioned Everything School too, man. I mean, I said this over the summer, I think it was, and I got a lot of pushback from Texas folks because there's a trophy they hand out for it. But I went on record and said I think that Tennessee's got the best athletics department in the country with what they're doing, and the big sports. Obviously, we can go down the entire list, but. Yeah, man, it's a great time to be a Vol. I know the playoff didn't go the way we all hoped it would, but still, man, I remember a time not too long ago where those on Rocky Top would have dreamed of a 10-win season and making a college ball playoff. So yeah, it's a great time to be a volunteer, man. And I appreciate you having me on.
Absolutely, and I think that's one of the things that I think there's it's not a divide within the fan base, but I wanted to get your perspective on this because over the last couple of weeks, and there's been a lot of time for reflection because Tennessee gets boat raced in Columbus. No shame in that, as you saw with Oregon getting boat raced in the Rose Bowl by the Buckeyes. So I think there was a lot of instant reaction of like, oh, look at how far away Tennessee is from the real top dogs of the Ohio States of the world. Obviously, 0-4 against Georgia to this point in the Heupel era. But you've also beaten Alabama twice. You've beaten Florida twice. You've won 70% of your games. He has the best winning percentage as a Tennessee head coach since Philip Fulmer. That is Josh Heupel. So Josh Heupel has raised the floor significantly. But I think one of the first time going into year 5 that I've seen just within this fan base, and I'm like in the fishbowl writing and podcasting, and I kind of eat, sleep, and dream Tennessee sports. So it's a little bit different for me and my vantage point. I wanted to get your outside perspective on this, Chris, because I think there is a question of good to great now for Tennessee, and I posit this to you. I think it's a lot easier in this era to get from a bad situation to good. I think there is a lot of room to get to good in a hurry. And Josh Heupel got Tennessee to good in a hurry. I think it's really hard to be go from one of the 8 to 12 best programs in college football to one of the 1 to 5 best programs of college football. And I think that's kind of where Tennessee's at, is in that weird in-between where fans don't want to be, but they don't want to come off as ungrateful for where Heupel has brought this program in 4 years, but also deal with the realities of like, hey, if we still want to win a national title. Like, we want to be in everything school. We want to be good at everything, but we also still won a national title in 1998. We still want to ultimately get to that point where we're realistically contending for a national title and not getting the doors blown off in Columbus in our first playoff game. Like, I understand both sides of it, but where do you come down on it going into year 5 with Josh Heupel at Tennessee?
Yeah, I think, Chase, first off, you make a lot of really good points. I mean, I think going into year 5, I'm really bullish on what Tennessee will be moving forward, and I'm really giddy about what Heupel has done to this point, obviously. I mean, again, I just, you mentioned the gratitude part. We can't have this conversation without, I think, first thinking about what Tennessee football was 5 years ago, just 5 years ago, just how, what he inherited, what he took over, and how quickly they got it going. I think, to your point, that is a great point. I think, there was already so much pressure and expectations and not a lot of patience when it comes to SEC football programs, and of course a place like Tennessee where you expect to win and you're used to winning. But now certainly, I mean, we're seeing it across college football. If you have one good portal haul, like you mentioned, you can go from being kind of down in the gutter to a pretty solid program. We see it happen all the time. So how do you go from that good to great? I don't think the way you do that is blow it up, right? I mean, I saw some of the same things you saw after the Ohio State game. Heupel's not the guy. He can't win the big one. I just, I think what we learned this year, Chase, Jimmy's and Joe's matter. Having the right coaches on your coaching staff matter. Having the right head coach matters. But I feel like we learned this year, like, schedule and then matchups in the playoff matter a lot. And I'm not, I'm not saying you just got to sit back and kind of hope that one day you're going to have the stars align and have all those things play in your favor. But that does go a long way, right? I mean, it does. So, the fact that Tennessee, they unfortunately drew the short straw. Nobody was going to beat Ohio State that night they played them.
Mm-hmm.
I don't care who it was in the playoff. Nobody was going to win that game. I think Tennessee's in a great spot. I mean, I do. I mean, I think if we're sitting here complaining about a 10-win season and what didn't go right in a 10-win season, man, we've sure come a long way when it comes to talking about football and Rocky Top. So, listen, I know the frustration is there because you go one and done in the college ball playoff. And, I think some folks maybe are still upset about the Arkansas game. I was at that one firsthand. It wasn't a great night for the Vols, obviously. And I think there are things to nitpick, right? Like, this is a huge offseason for Nico Iamaleava. Like, it's a huge offseason for that offense and getting the most out of the quarterback position. But, no, I mean, I love what Heupel's done to this point. And my belief is this. If he can take what he inherited and get it to this point and get us to a place where I really do feel like the floor for Tennessee, I mean, I think we saw that with Milton was kind of an 8-win floor. I thought that's why it was so important to at least hit that mark, even though you knew kind of felt like a bridge year with Milton under center. Again, you win 10 games this season. I feel like if he can take it from the point from where he inherited it to here, I believe he can take it from this point to an elite level. It's never been harder, right? I mean, it's with the portal, and it's more competitive than it's ever been. I mean, the SEC, I think it's only going to be more and more wide open as we continue this thing. I mean, really, truly, just because the dispersion of talent, and not anybody's able to hoard the talent like in years past. But so I think Tennessee's on the right path, man. I just, I think that it's going to come down to, can the stars align when it comes to schedule and matchups in the college football playoff? I mean, let's take it for right now. Texas got a good slate to get to the semis, right? Like they had a favorable slate. And again, that's kind of a luck of the draw thing, but at the same time, like in a 12-team playoff, which is only probably going to continue to expand, you're going to have to get some breaks like that. So again, bottom line is this. I love what Josh Heupel has built to this point. He's brought Tennessee football back to a place of national relevance. And I believe in Heupel being the guy to get Tennessee to that next level. They've got to hit on guys in the portal. They got to continue to recruit well. And I think, Chase, you would agree with this. They've got to tap into the potential of Nico Iamaleava and get the most out of him. And I think he's obviously got the skill set, got the talent, but we got to see him take that next step going into 25 and beyond.
Yeah, and I think second half from the second half of the Alabama game on, Iamaleava was a really good quarterback. Like he showed a lot. I mean, just running the football, and part of what you've seen, and I think part of the reason that Tennessee had some more success down the stretch was that Nico started running. You saw Joe Milton had a lot of success running the football against Alabama a year ago, where on the road, the reason that Tennessee had Alabama on the ropes going in the half was Joe Milton was doing some option stuff. He was lowering his shoulder. He had some grid darts to Squirrel White early on to put Alabama on their heels. But I think that's just has to be a part of this offense. And I think Nico was more in the pocket early on and was not really comfortable using his legs nearly enough early on this season. And then he grew into it. He was a warrior in that Ohio State game where everything around him was imploding offensively. Nico was he stood tall. Nico is the least of my concerns on offense. I think it's fair from a Tennessee standpoint. If you're a fan, you're looking at this going, okay, you're bringing in David Sanders Jr., 5-star, number 1 offensive tackle, probably going to start right away at the right tackle spot. You brought in Lance Hurd, who was 5-star last year coming in. LSU, he was behind 2 NFL offensive tackles, so it made sense why he entered the portal and you get there. He didn't grade well, PFF. He had a rough year. Lance Hurd had a rough year 1 in this system. You didn't get good right tackle play at all from John Campbell and Dane Davis. So when your tackles were rough, the Oklahoma game, Arkansas, Georgia, you go through it, the tackles really had a rough go of it throughout the year. So a lot of it wasn't on Nico, but then you also have the receivers where you clean house basically at the receiver spot. And now you're kind of behind the 8 ball at receiver, and Zachariah Branch goes to your rival. Noah Thomas looks like he might end up either at Georgia or staying home at Texas A&M. There's not a lot. If you look at the top 20 guys in the portal, they've all committed. Like Micah Hudson and Isaiah Horton and all those dudes, they're gone. Who you might have had a connection with, they're off the board. So you're in a youth movement no matter what. Getting Mike Matthews back is important. I like Mike Matthews. I like Braylon Staley. You have some blue chippers in this room. The problem now is it's uncharted waters because a lot of the guys out there were your evals. And the only receivers that have succeeded in the Heupel era are Pruitt guys, like Jalen Hyatt, Cedric Tillman. Your 2 best players were Pruitt guys. And then outside of that were transfers. Brew McCoy, Velus Jones Jr., Dante Thornton. Dante Thornton was your best receiver this year. If you could have one guy back, and this is something I was going to talk on the later part of our show, was like, if there was one guy I could have back, it'd be like Dante Thornton. Like, I wish we got one more year of Thornton just because he's such a game breaker, and he was just important. Like, if you look at this, when Tennessee lost, it's really easy. Dante Thornton did not have a good game, or Dante Thornton wasn't available. Like, Dante Thornton was an X factor for this Tennessee offense. But I think if you're a fan, I think it's fair to be nervous about what this receiver room is going to be, because you're putting so much on these young wideouts. You're putting so much on a redshirt sophomore quarterback. You're putting so much on a redshirt sophomore left tackle and a true freshman right tackle. So two things can be true. That's a lot of talent there, but that is a lot to put on a youth movement on offense where you're coming off a really rough offensive season where you were 94th in passing in conference play, throwing the football. Like, it doesn't mean it can't work, but it is fair, I think, for fans to be a little anxious about what this is all going to look like in 25, because it's such a huge year. Nico, year 2, if all goes well, he's gone to the NFL. Like, you lose Dylan Sampson, your bell cow back. Like, who knows what that looks like running football. There's just a lot of change, and there's a lot of talent, but it's unproven talent. So I think it's okay to be a little bit anxious about where things are headed in 25, coming off a 10-win year. It's like you still can be grateful for what is, but you also can look at it as like, hey, the 2 years that Heupel's had to go to Tuscaloosa and Gainesville, they went 7-5 in the regular season, and they went 8-4. And obviously, both seasons they started off with Joe Milton, but it's not all Joe Milton as to why Tennessee has struggled in those off years. For Tennessee to get back in the playoff, they have to win one of Georgia, at Alabama, or at Florida. Like, no 9-3 team is getting in the CFP. And to your point, a lot of teams I think got better. Like, South Carolina is going to be better. I think Mizzou could be good again. I mean, Auburn, they've gone all in. Auburn should be better. Like, there's a lot of talent behind them, and Tennessee squeaked their way in, but 9-3 is not going to do it. Like, you're going to have to go 10-2 at worst again, and I think the schedule is going to be more arduous for them to get that. I mean, what do you think of that?
Yeah, and I want to say, Chase, too, I'm glad you brought all that up about, because I it's so easy to give too much of the credit and too much of the blame to the quarterback, but we said for weeks at the end of the season that somebody's got to help Nico out. They got to help Nico. And I think you even watched the Ohio State game, and he was a warrior for pretty much the entirety of that game. I mean, the cracked helmet was obviously kind of the image that stands out, but he was the only thing that really gave them a chance. So to your point, and I mean, heck, we saw another contender, Georgia, have these problems with drops. And I mean, I think if you looked at, and this is just kind of top of mind because we're having the conversation, most disappointing position groups in the entire conference, like, I think the Tennessee wide receivers have to be up there. I mean, it was stunning just how poorly they played this season, and again, how little they helped out Nico. So, getting Mike Matthews back, obviously, from the portal, he obviously entered for a brief moment, came back. That's obviously a big deal. And you mentioned the offensive line. I mean, again, I was at that game in person in Arkansas where they just got bullied. It was really that was the difference in the football game. So I think you're absolutely right with the tackle play. It's got to get better up front, and they got to get some game breakers on the outside that can, help what's still really a young quarterback, only 1 year of starting experience. But, you talk about the schedule, the key game, and this is, looking way too far ahead, but just hearing you rattle them off, man, you've got to beat Florida at the Swamp. That streak has to end. I don't know how you can get to 10 wins and have a successful year. The year Vol fans want and are expecting, I don't know how you can get there without winning that game. I mean, I know it's I'll probably talk myself into picking Tennessee again, although there's no proof of concept since 2003. But it has to happen at some point, man. It just does. I think that's when, and I think that's a game, Chase, and you can tell me, agree or disagree, but fairly or unfairly, that is a game that if Tennessee and if Josh Heupel lose that football game, that's where the convos will start about what is the Heupel tenure, what are we doing? And again, fairly or unfairly, but that's you cannot, in my mind, lose that football game. And to your point, get to 10 wins, which is what I do agree I think it'll take to get in the college football playoff in 2025. So I think that's a game you got to win. Then you can worry about the Georgias, and certainly, you're at Alabama. And that was that game, that was one that I obviously attended, felt really confident about even before the season. Hey, that game is at Neyland in Knoxville. It's going to be a madhouse. And it played out sort of, I think, how we thought it would. But going to Bryant-Denny, year 2 of Kalen DeBoer is going to be dicey. You've got to win that game, I think, in the Swamp to have a realistic shot to hit double-digit wins again.
It's funny you say that, because if I had to rank the three of, like, most likely Tennessee to win, I think Florida would be the least likely to me.
Is that more of like a mental thing or truly a personnel thing?
Oh, it's a mental thing. Like at this point, it's just been so long, and the House of Horrors.
There are goblins in the field there.
It's just so bad, man. Like,
yeah.
I mean, they've improved in how they play Georgia of late. They've improved. Like, they've given Bama a run for their money both times in Tuscaloosa. Like, they play Bama well every year under Heupel. Heupel's, whether it's DeBoer, he's now 1-0 against DeBoer, or Saban, he gave them all they could handle in those 4 years. I mean, Tennessee was in that game in 2021 in Tuscaloosa. Like, they were in that football game going into the fourth quarter and got blown out. They ran out of horses, but they were there. 23, like I said, if you convert one more of those red zone trips and you're up 3 touchdowns instead of 2 going to halftime, I think Tennessee beats Alabama in 2023. So they're right there in Tuscaloosa. That one I think is winnable. Georgia at home, like winning in Neyland, like he's lost one time in Neyland Stadium the last 3 years. So I'm always going to lean towards Heupel in Neyland. It's just at Gainesville, man. Like the Gainesville games have been disasters. Like it's been disasters, headlined by 2 years ago. But I guess the one caveat that might be in Tennessee's favor, and I wrote about this at Vols Hub, was they flipped it. So Georgia's now early on, and you get that early at home. You go to Florida in late November now. Like, it's a very different deal. The last time, like, Tennessee won in 9/11, the year 9/11 happened, they had to move that game. So Tennessee played in Gainesville in December and won that game. So it's one of those where we'll see what Florida looks like by the end of the year. Because, I mean, they still have a gauntlet of a schedule, and they finished strong this year. But what if they get off to a terrible start this year, Napier implodes, whatever, and you get them later in the year? So my position might change depending on how Florida season go, but that is something I think that might end up benefiting Tennessee, is that they're getting Florida at the end of the year where maybe things don't go right and they're checking out at that point.
Yeah, it's always seemed like, to your point, Chase, that game was early enough to where, Florida, the hopes are still high,
yes.
Especially over the last decade or so, where the Florida teams haven't been as good as what we saw, obviously, in those late 2000s, mid 2000s, whatever. So, yeah, that's interesting, that game being late for sure. And again, you get Georgia. I mean, listen, man, I know Gunnar Stockton just played in the college ball playoff, but I mean, you get him early. Stockton goes in a Rocky Top. I mean, that's a hard place for even a veteran quarterback to win. So, I think what's one of the things on a side note that's going to be interesting about the SEC in 2025 is so many of these top contenders are going to be depending on new signal callers, right? I mean, I know Arch Manning at Texas. I feel really comfortable with Arch, but still, new guy, right? It's going to be different. Gunnar Stockton takes over at Georgia. More than likely, Ty Simpson takes over at Alabama. So there's going to be a lot of different pieces. But that Tennessee-Florida game, those will be 2 signal callers returning in Lagway and Nico Iamaleava. And I know, too, I'm sure that the game that happened this year in Knoxville, where it went to overtime to beat the Gators, that doesn't give any positive, like, warm and fuzzy feelings. I've talked to Tennessee folks and even Florida folks, but Tennessee folks especially, they say that no matter what the records, that game is just weird, that it's always close.
Richardson had the ball and the chance to win 3 years ago. Like, even they had the ball. He threw a pick in the last play of the game, but they were driving, onside kick and everything. Like, Tennessee's special year in 22. Florida had the ball in Neyland with a chance to go up and win.
Well, streaks are made to be broken. I still just
I hate the Florida game, Chris. I'm always going to hate it. Like, I cannot wait to not play Florida every year. I can't wait for this after this year.
I'm just thinking,
I need it out of here.
Even if you beat Georgia, if you lose that game to Florida late, I just don't know that you'll be able to, like, get rid of that nasty taste in your
because
mouth.
It will be awful. Like, there's no way it's a normal loss. Like, if you lose to Florida and Gainesville, it's just
because I don't think Florida is probably going to be like a top 10 team at that point. I feel good about Florida with Lagway. Like, I think they could be solid, but I still think we're going to get to that game in November and be like, this is a game Tennessee should win.
Yeah, 100%.
Based off of football knowledge. Now, again, like I said, there's voodoo, it seems like, in the swamp for that game. So who knows?
Oh, 100%. Well, you mentioned it. You touched on this, and I wanted to ask you about. So, as an SEC connoisseur all over the 16 here, Chris, I'm curious where you have Tennessee power ranked early on here in 2025, because I saw Ari Wasserman and Andy Staples have South Carolina, Auburn, Florida all in their top 10. Tennessee not in there. Where do you have Tennessee in 25? Because I would have them outside of the CFP right now. I think it's a lot of prove it. Doesn't mean they can't, but I have them more in like the 9-3, 8-4 range as it stands right now. And I don't know where that ultimately puts them in the pecking order in the SEC. But where do you have them going into 25? And who do you have in front of them and behind them?
Yeah, and I'll say this too, Chase. I've got nothing but respect for anybody else's like rankings or way too earlys or anything like that. But putting South Carolina, Auburn, Florida in the top 10 is certainly a choice. It's a choice, no doubt.
Auburn especially, man. Can you get one winning season and on the Plains before we put him in the top 10?
I was taken aback by it, to say the least. I resisted from commenting on it on social media or anything, but yeah, I was. I don't know that you're gonna have to show me your work. You know what I mean?
Yes.
When it comes to that one. Right now, just off the top of my head, I'd probably put Tennessee around the probably 6 or 7 range. Again, this is just all off the top of the head. I mean, I feel like, to your point, this Tennessee team and kind of the way that I'm thinking about them going into 25, what you mentioned, like all the moving pieces, all the things you have to replace, you're replacing things defensively as well. They're slightly above middle of the pack, but to your point, if let's be optimistic and say 4 SEC teams make the playoff, it's either 3 or 4 more than likely. They're probably in that 6th or 7th, like kind of just on the outside looking in right now, until we see proof of certain things play out on the field, which again, I mean, isn't a bad place to be. I mean, it's kind of where Tennessee was going into the 24 season. I think even I was a little bit more optimistic about them. I picked them to go to the playoff, and I think I had them in my top 5 in my power rankings going in the year, but they'll be slightly below that, I think, is to your point. I mean, God, it's just hard to imagine there's not somewhat of a drop-off after losing a Dylan Sampson and again, a James Pierce and some of these other guys. But, again, then it's, another year for Nico Iamaleava, some of the upgrades, I think what you talked about the offensive line. So, again, I'd put them right above middle of the pack with certainly the potential. The ceiling is much higher, but, could the floor be lower? I mean, I think there could be some volatility there, which just depending on what are the answers to some of these questions we have. So, yeah, I agree with you to the point right now, and I think that's fair, 6 or 7. But, again, if some things click in the positive, certainly Tennessee could be a top 3 or 4 team in the conference, I think.
Yeah, because it's just hard to think about. Like, I have no idea what to do with Ole Miss right now. I have no idea really what to do with LSU. South Carolina still prove it. Like, I think there's a lot of reason for optimism, but like until I see it, until I see it,
and they lose a lot
season.
too. I mean, they lose a lot too. I mean, I think you saw in the bowl game for South Carolina, no Rocket Sanders in that game, and they lose. You know what I mean?
Right.
They're not going to have him next year. So it's especially too, Chase, to your point, with the way the rosters have changed and will continue to change, and I think it's kind of interesting. I mean, spring ball and spring games actually help us a little, maybe even more than they did before, because we actually get to kind of see and, okay, let's mentally put it all together, stack these rosters together. I joke with people, though, like, we're obviously going to make our picks and predictions. I'll do way too earlys myself, and we'll make picks one of the year. But we've never known less about these squads than, we used to a few years ago, where it's like, all right, we know these guys. They've all been here 3 or 4 years, and then you add a freshman class in, and, the portal has made it as such where, like we saw this past season, the volatility and teams overachieving, underachieving. But, yeah, I feel confident in saying, listen, I think a couple years ago, again, when they had Joe Milton, 8 wins was what you finished with. I kind of felt like Heupel established what the floor of his Tennessee program was going to be. Because, I mean, again, you mentioned year one, you went 7 games, but it's year one. So I don't see Tennessee sliding below, anything like 8 and 4. It's just is what's going to need to click to get back to 10 wins. That's the big question. I think the floor will be around 8, but what is the ceiling? I think that's the bigger question for the Vols.
I agree, because I think the ultimate wild card is the home game against Oklahoma.
Yeah,
I think John Mateer and Ben Arbuckle coming in, John Mateer is a good player, and I could see that one being just obviously with the history with Heupel and Oklahoma and everything else. And I don't know, it would not surprise me if Oklahoma is a little bit feisty in 25, and that game's more of a toss-up than people are anticipating.
Well, and like I said too, man, I mean, you think about, we're talking about unknowns. I mean, Georgia's got a new starting quarterback. Mississippi State, I guess Blake Shapen might come back. And, I mean, what are they going to be, right? Can they win a conference game?
I think they're going to be bad again, Chris. Yeah, I'm just going to go ahead and pencil Mississippi State bad again.
That's. I mean, can they win a conference game? That'll be the question. Yeah. I think Arkansas I think Arkansas is going to be exactly what they were this year from the standpoint of just a really volatile, dangerous 6-win team. But you get them at home.
They lost, 30 guys in the portal already? I think they lead the SEC in portal losses.
Yeah. But I kind of feel like their identity as a program under Sam Pittman's pretty well defined at this point. Like, they're going to win 1 or 2 or whatever that they shouldn't. They'll lose 1 or 2 that, they shouldn't. And Taylon Green will be the roller coaster ride that he was all throughout 2024. So, I mean, you get that at home, you should win. But again, Bama's got a new quarterback. Kentucky's got a new quarterback. Oklahoma's got a new quarterback. Florida's got Lagway and obviously the Swamp. And then you get Vandy at home with Diego Pavia, but you obviously didn't have any issues with that this year. So it's like when we're talking about best case, worst case, which we will do that. I mean, I would be confident putting the worst case at 8-4. I mean, you could say best case is 10, 11 wins. I mean, Georgia is going to be the tone setter.
The amount of orange Kool-Aid to throw out at 11 here, Chris, is 11's I love
aggressive.
that.
11's aggressive. It's probably 10. 11 is very aggressive. But,
yeah,
I mean, momentum's a real thing, man. And I think you look at Tennessee's schedule. I mean, I know you open up with Syracuse, but, I mean, East Tennessee State, if you were to beat Georgia and you're 3-0, UAB 4-0, Mississippi State 5-0, you could be 6-0 with the win over Arkansas going into Bryant-Denny.
Yeah.
And at that point, with that type of momentum, I mean, who knows? So
you're a playoff team at that point. If you get through
yeah.
Georgia and Syracuse late and you're 6-0 going into Alabama, I think they're a playoff team. I think we can go and pencil
again,
them.
I think Georgia will be. I mean, who knows? I mean, we know what Kirby Smart's going to roll out there, but with Gunnar Stockton going into Neyland, like you said, if that's a night game, I mean, I'll be hard.
I don't know, man. Tennessee has been shut out in back-to-back second halves of these Georgia games.
Fair enough.
I don't know. I need to see it. I'm not going to talk myself into Georgia until it's like Georgia and at Florida are the two I just can't talk myself into at this point.
You have to prove it. Yeah.
Yeah. At Alabama, though, I can easily talk myself into that one.
Yeah.
I can talk myself into what Alabama is now.
I know I'm asking you a question on your show, but I would, there's a lot of, to your point, we're kind of at a crossroads sort of with the Josh Heupel era in Knoxville. Is that the next step for Heupel, is beating Georgia or proving you can win at the Swamp? Like, will it take a win like that to be like, we've gone into like we've gone up to the next rung of the ladder. We've moved to the next level of the Heupel era. Does it take a win like that?
This is going to be a cop-out, Chris, but I think for me, it's not the game. It's not a game in particular. It's a pivot on offense, because I think he has to change. He has to adjust to how SEC defenses are defending him and his offense now. It's been 4 years of tape now, and last year was a slog. 2 years ago was a slog passing the football. Like, you're always gonna be able to run the ball with the wide splits and everything in the light boxes. Like, Tennessee's gonna be able to run the football, but I do think more than anything going into year 5, it's the passing game. Like, it has to be developing receivers, developing in-house guys, developing anyone on the offensive line. There has not been one in-house developed offensive lineman. Cooper Mays is gone. He was a Pruitt guy. Javonte Spraggins, Pruitt guy. He's gone. Andre Carrick transfer at left guard. Lance Hurd transfer at left tackle. Right tackle, like David Sanders should be a slam dunk. He should be your first. Like, David Sanders should be a plug and play. Like, this all works like a Darnell Wright type, but I need to see it. So for me, it's less about beating Georgia or getting over this one game hump. To me, it's like we got to see that, like, this offense is the passing offense can get back to. It doesn't have to be exactly what it was in 22, where you were the best passing offense in college football and you were just scoring at will. Like, I just think that's not realistic at this point to get back to. But you need to get back to, like, you can't be 94th in passing in conference play. You can't get shut out in the first half for a month straight. Like, the defense carried this team, and Dylan Sampson in the second half carried this team. I think there's just because the season's long and it's kind of easy to forget, but, like, this offense was a mess for the good majority of this season. So I think for me, it's less winning us in any particular game and more, man, this passing game has to get cleaned up. You have to have a new reversal for what defenses are throwing at you with the 3-3-5 and stuff. Like, you have to find a way to get that back, or this is a problem.
It's just astonishing, Chase, that we're talking about the offense being the biggest question going into year 5 for Josh Heupel's team, where a couple of years ago, I feel like we were just kind of like, hey, can they just get a stop? And
defense is good now.
Yeah, now the defense is really good, and it's the other side of the football. Can you just put it all together? Which I would agree with you to your point. The story, and from my mind, in the 2024 Vols was just a team that could not play a complete game for whatever reason. Just it wasn't. It's kind of like being a golfer. One day, if it's not your chipping, it's your putting. If it's not your putting, it's your driving. There was just always something that wasn't quite in sync. Because to your point, I mean, again, 10-2 on paper in the regular season. Nobody would have turned that down.
Yeah.
It was just how it happened and how it looked and maybe even how it felt, So it's kind of funny how that plays out. How that dictates so much of the feelings. But to your point, and it is weird us as fans. If Tennessee would have went 10-2 and scored 50 a game, and the defense wouldn't have been very good, there's probably a different vibe.
Yeah.
It's just college football today. I get it. You score to win, and defense I think still does win championships, or just enough defense. But you don't want to be a defensively dominated team, especially when your coach is supposed to be this offensive mastermind.
I mean, you develop on defense. Rodney Garner just won his
Right.
position coach award. Like, Rodney
Right.
Garner is a beast on the defensive line.
Yeah.
Linebacker, you're bringing in blue chippers everywhere. William Inge rotates. Brian John Marie was right there. Like, you have really good line. I think the linebackers will be good this year with Spillman and Arian Carter. Corners, you've settled that. You've developed Ricky Gibson. He's an in-house guy. Caleb Beasley's in there. Like, you're good at corner. Like, you have maybe the two best cornerbacks Tennessee's had in 25 years. The best quarterback combo with Jemai McCoy and Ricky Gibson. And then you have Boo Carter, superstar freshman. Your only true freshman starter at star. Defense is fine. Like, defense, like, it's like you said, it's weird to be at this point, but it's the offense. And it's not the running game. It is the passing offense and pass protection that is it's just an unknown right now.
How much, Chase, will Tennessee fans start to wonder if the offense struggles again in 2025? Will they start to say that it was more Alex Golish's doing and not?
I mean, they're already saying that now. Like, that's already
Yeah.
And I don't know how much of it.
That's why I asked, because I figured. Yeah, I figured.
I don't know how much of it's Golish. I would think part of it is just the first 2 years people weren't up to it, right? Like, Hendon
it was
Hooker
a brand new foreign thing. It was, and you had the right trigger man, to your point.
Yes. Hendon Hooker was just a special guy in this system. Like, that was a big part of it. And he was older. Like, Hendon Hooker was 24 the year that Tennessee had their special season and offensively. Like, Nico was 19 this year. Like, it's just, that's a big, big difference. So for me, I think it's a big deal for Nico, but I just,
I think too, Chase, what hurt in 24, not to cut you off, was that, before the season, and I mean, I heard it firsthand and saw it on social media. Just, it was so disappointing because, like, nobody was coming in, or at least very few that I saw were coming in. Hey guys, let's keep the expectations realistic with Nico.
Yeah.
He's a young quarterback. It was like, hey, this kid can win a Heisman. You know what I mean? So, like,
and he still can next year.
And he still can. I'm not saying he was set up to fail, but man, those are some lofty expectations to meet. And I think that's what he saw. Is it's still, even in a system that's quarterback friendly like Josh Heupel's is, it's still really hard to go out in this league on a week in, week out basis and play at an elite level at the quarterback position, especially when, to your point, your offensive line's being inconsistent, your receivers aren't helping you out, they're dropping the football. Like, it's very hard to play at an elite level when you got all that going and you're a young guy going through the fire for the first time.
100%. We'll wrap up with this, Chris, because we're both big SEC baseball and college baseball guys, and Tennessee obviously coming off a national championship season. I saw Perfect Game, I think, is who put out their preseason top 25 here this week. Tennessee, number 5, which I thought was a little interesting because there's 3 teams in the SEC ahead of them. Georgia at 4 blew my mind. That one just is bold, in my opinion. To put Georgia ahead of Tennessee right out of the gate. But LSU and Texas A&M, usual suspects, and I think that's probably right there at 1 and 2. UVA at number 3 there. But what do you make of Tennessee in 2025 and their chances of repeating? Because we've obviously had Ole Miss, Mississippi State, LSU, and now Tennessee here. Haven't had a repeat champ in the conference. Do you think Tennessee has the best chance of the previous 4 SEC champ winners to repeat, or do you think repeat with the amount of turnover in that lineup is just going to be too much for them to run it back?
Well, and I think there's a lot of turnover for sure. I mean, you lose guys like Semo and Blake Burke and Drew Beam off the bump. I mean, there's I was fortunate enough, Chase, to watch this team in Omaha firsthand and get to sit in and listen to Tony Vitello. It was a really special group. It goes just beyond everybody in the SEC's got talent, certainly some more than others, but you got to have the right guys and the chemistry. And I think that's what listen, we saw it with this Tennessee team last year. The team a few years ago that won 50 plus games in the regular season. They were more talented, but this team just had it. It had the it factor, and it every time there was a big moment that this team rallied around each other. And I thought what really encapsulated them was the Semo clip where he's talking to the dugout like let's fight. Like they just had that. They had that intangible thing that all these great championship teams do. So there's a lot of turnover. I mean, I think the good news is this: you've recruited as well as anybody in the country. You've worked in the portal, and you still have Tony Vitello leading your ball club. And I mean, I've said this, before last season, and I'll say this again. If I was starting a college baseball program and I had to pick one guy to lead my program, it'd be Tony Vitello. I just think for today's game, the way he relates to players, the way he coaches the game, the way I think he understands the dynamics of different personalities and the way that some guys, need to be coached different than others. And I just think Tony V, the way he does everything he does, and I think there's a reason, again, he's the reigning national champion, and he's an elite coach. I think they have the best chance, to your point, of the previous champions to go back and repeat. Again, I'm not going to doubt Tony Vitello. But you do lose a lot. It'll be about early on. I mean, that's what non-conference is for, is kind of managing through that. And let's find out who our new contributors are, man. I mean, it's who's going to replace a Blake Burke in the lineup, who's going to replace a Christian Moore in the lineup. I mean, you got some key pieces back, obviously, with guys like Dean Curley, Dalton Bargo, Peebles, Chapman, Dylan Loy, Nate Snead on the bump. So there's still a lot of talent. There's a really strong core, strong nucleus. But, I mean, and it's one of the reasons I love SEC baseball. You do too. The margins for error, man, are, people think that like SEC football is elite, and it is. And basketball we've seen has been incredible, but man, SEC baseball is just a different beast entirely, it feels like at times. So, and I know Tony V would tell you, man, it's this fall ball was important. These first few weeks of spring are going to be pivotal, and obviously non-conference play will be critical for them for establishing new roles and who are going to be these new guys that step up. But listen, a standard's been established in Knoxville. Mm-hmm. So I do they repeat as national champions? Really tough to say, because it's really, really hard to win a national championship. But I mean, I feel pretty darn good about this team getting back to Omaha and at least having a shot. So I think, to your point, I was stunned how highly rated Georgia was. I was stunned how highly rated Texas was. I mean, listen, I like to hire Jim Schlossnagle as much as the next guy, but I mean, come on, man. Like year one, like they got a lot. They got some guys, but they've got a lot of talent, but a lot of question marks to answer there. I feel like that's, and shocker, I feel like that's kind of Texas being overvalued because of the brand and because they've got the flashy new coach. I think A&M being one is right. I think that when you look at what they return and huge boost they got when Prager decided to come back to school, and I mean Lavalette, Grahovic, they're loaded. I mean, they're straight up loaded. LSU, to your point, kind of same thing. They're just like a Tennessee. They just reload every single year. So yeah, I think the Vols have got as good a shot as anybody. It'll be about replacing, not just what those guys meant from a statistical standpoint, but I think from a leadership standpoint, who's going to be those guys, that next wave that steps up and becomes the next Christian Moore, Blake Burke, and leaders in the clubhouse and, leaders on the field as well. But the last thing I'm doing is doubting Tony Vitello. I think he'll have Tennessee right in the mix again, whether it comes to, atop the SEC regular season battle or certainly the SEC tournament. I think the road to Omaha, I think the Vols will play a factor yet again. We'll see if they can win a national title, make it back-to-back. Again, I don't doubt them, but you got to answer some things early on in the season for sure.
I'm excited to see, to your point, like one of the things is just like us nerding out over early season baseball. It's just that like there's a lot of positions up for grabs here for Tennessee. Like there is some real talent coming in. I think the starting rotation is going to be better. We'll see when AJ Russell is able to factor back in. But I mean, Liam Doyle and Andrew Fisher, the Ole Miss transfers, by all accounts, have settled in really well, and they just feel like just perfect Tony Vitello Tennessee players. And if Liam Doyle is southpaw, electric arm, on Friday nights, you have Tegan Coons, another big-time prospect over the weekend. Maybe it's Dylan Loy on Sundays. But they have options. They still have all the flamethrowers, like Nate Snead's back, and I think they're going to be throwing heat in the bullpen. The bullpen is going to be loaded. I'm very excited to see there's not a Joyce back there. There's not a 105, but there's some talent with Franklin and Breedlove and all. Like there's going to be a lot of heat from this Tennessee rotation. So I'm really excited to see what that looks like. But I would feel really good about their repeat chances if they got one of Dylan Driley and Kavaris Tears back. Like I think losing them both is just because like Burke and Simo are unbelievable and they were awesome. And they were 3-year players, and those are just incredibly hard to come by in modern college baseball. It's just guys who sit and learn and get 3 years in the system. And it's just such a weird, like, with the draft rules, like, are you a 2-year? Like Dean Curley's a 2-year guy. So you're only going to get 2 years of Dean. I think Dean's going to be your best hitter this year. But Dean has all the making of the next superstar top of the lineup for Tennessee. But like you have a a freshman, true freshman, Jay Abernathy. I think he's a name to know. Hunter Ensley, leader of the team, he's back. That's huge. Reese Chapman has all the talent in the world. I wouldn't be surprised if he's a breakout star in the Kavaris Tiers spot there in right field this year in a full-time role. But I don't know. I would have loved it. Dylan Dreiling at left field for one more year would have been something, because left field's kind of up in the air. It might be Colby Backus. It might be Abernathy. It might be another guy we don't know yet. But if you were able to run back Chapman, Ensley, and Dreiling in that outfield, I'd feel really good, because Andrew Fisher, I think, is going to rake at third. And they're just now the transfer portal third base behemoths with Zane to Billy Amick to Andrew this year. I mean, he's going to hit bombs. Like, Andrew Fisher is going to bomb away at LNS. And Gavin Killen from Louisville, I think he's going to be really good. I think they have a lot of options. Dalton Bargo, I've been a huge Bargo guy from the beginning, the Mizzou transfer. But I don't know. I think they're going to be a really good team again. I would have liked to get one more guy, like a Dreiling back, because I think that is a lot of big time MLB turnover at that spot. And to be able to run it back just in this league, it's hard, man.
Yeah, and I mean, that's the thing, man. When you build a program like Tony V has, you're going to have a lot of turnover because you have a lot of really good players. Yeah. So they're all going to the league, and it's again his job to reload. But I mean, to your point, man, Tony V's just built such a program where, I think that's why one of the reasons they have success in the portal, they got a coach and a program that guys want to go play there. I mean, they want to go there, and in front of it. By the way, you mentioned a new look Lindsey Nelson Stadium, which I'm excited to see. Again, we'll be venturing out there at some point this spring, and can't wait to take it in firsthand, because I went a few years ago in 2022, and Tennessee
standing room only, man.
I'll say this: it was it's impressive. People don't realize how impressive it is what Vitello has built there when you think about the facilities challenge that he faced. And I mean, I know even for the media, man, they put I was told half the media sit out under a tent. Yeah. On the concourse. So,
it's gonna be 100% now. The press box isn't there this year. Like, it's all torn down. Like, it's under construction. Yeah, okay. They're like it's not gonna be done. So everyone's under the tent this year.
Yeah. Hey, it'll show how much who loves it. Who really loves it. Who's coming out to watch Tennessee play East Tennessee State in the midweek in 45-degree weather, right? Yeah. That's who really loves the game. But no, to your point, man. I mean, I think Tennessee's gonna be right back in the thick of things, and it'll be your usual suspects, I think, at the top. I mean, I think Florida's going to factor into the East as well. I'm really curious what Vanderbilt's going to be under Tim Corbin. You got Paul Maneri at South Carolina. Who knows how that's going to play out? What does Kentucky do for an encore? You talk about a team that lost a lot of pieces. Yeah.
They feel like a fallback team.
I mean, I think in a place like Kentucky, I just don't know that you really have the capacity to reload like an LSU, a Tennessee, even a Florida. Some of your more traditional blue bloods, right? So, but who knows? I mean, they weren't expected to do anything last year, and technically split the season.
We're not doing that. We're not doing that. I
lost the season, lost the series, but split the title.
Yeah, that's just
Anyways, though, made it to Omaha, which was crazy. So, and I like Mingione a lot. He's the epitome of doing more with less. So, but no, I mean, listen, the Vols are going to be right back there. I can't wait. I mean, I'm a huge baseball guy, and we're counting down the days to opening day. We'll be covering it, talking about it, watching all the games. And again, it's a good time to be a Vol, man. I mean, top of the country in basketball. Rick Barnes has got it rolling. I think if I saw correctly, women's basketball is also on a bit of a roll.
They lost yesterday, but first loss of the season. Okay. But yeah, they're rolling too.
Yeah, they're rolling too. I mean, it's Tennessee's in everything school, man, like you mentioned. So it's a good time. Good time on Rocky Top.
I love it. Chris, what can the good folks check out from you and your team over at SEC Unfiltered this week?
Yeah, Chase, I appreciate it, man. We're at SEC Unfiltered, X, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, wherever you get your content, YouTube, podcast, and, of course, our website, secunfiltered.com. And specifically this week, we're hammering the basketball coverage. Next week, we will start diving into the college baseball stuff, because next Tuesday, at least Tuesday, the 14th, will be exactly 1 month from opening day. So we'll start diving into all of our preseason stuff. But, and then, of course, we're talking college football playoff. Texas is on Friday, so still talking football. Portals and madhouse, as of course we all expect, and plenty of roster movement, man. So we're getting after it and enjoying doing it. And Chase, again, it's always a pleasure, man. Looking forward to linking up with you when we get it to Rocky Top, hopefully really soon.
I love it. Chris, keep up the great work, my friend, and we'll check back in again very soon.
Chase, you the man. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Nicely done, nephew. The Chase Thomas Podcast. Hell yeah.